The safest person on your team might not be the friendliest one in the room. The person who compliments you the fastest, who remembers your birthday, who always has something warm to stay in the hallway, that person may or may not be someone you can trust with anything that actually matters. And the quieter coworker, the one whose warmth shows up as follow-through more than words, who keeps confidences, who treats people the same way whether or not anyone's watching, that person might be the one worth building something with. Welcome back to your Trauma-Wise Career Guide. I'm your host, Cyndi Bennett. If you've ever sat in a meeting quietly cataloging who's safe and who isn't, this episode is for you. Today, I want to talk about what it actually looks like to build an ally at work when the broader culture doesn't feel safe to begin with. This matters because so much of the standard career advice about networking and relationship building assumes a baseline of trust that isn't universal. If you've been in a workplace where trust wasn't the default, that advice can feel disconnected from what you're actually navigating. So instead, we're going to talk about a different way to approach this. Identifying the one or two people whose behavior has already shown you something true. I'll walk you through the specific signals that tend to separate someone who's genuinely safe from someone who's just good at seeming that way, and what to do with that information once you notice it. Let's get into it. Most career advice about building workplace relationships assumes a baseline of safety that isn't universal. Build your network, get FaceTime with leadership, say yes to the coffee chat, show up to happy hour. That advice isn't wrong for every workplace. It's just built for a version of work where trust is the default setting and you're simply adding connections on top of it. If you've come out of a workplace where trust wasn't the default, where information got used against people, where kindness in public didn't match behavior behind closed doors, that advice can feel almost naive. You might notice yourself reading a room the standard networking guide never accounted for, watching for who talks about people the moment they leave, noticing who takes credit quietly and who gives it away, clocking the difference between someone who is nice to you and someone who is safe. That instinct isn't a flaw to fix. It's information you've earned. Here's what often shifts things. Finding an ally at work rarely requires trusting an entire team, department, or culture. Usually, it comes down to identifying one or two people who show up as consistent over time, even in small moments, even when nothing is at stake. One or two people, that's the actual target. A handful of people whose behavior holds up, whether the moment is high stakes or completely ordinary. This matters because when the broader culture feels unsafe, the instinct is often to either withdraw from everyone or overextend trust to whoever seems friendliest fastest. Both responses make sense. Both come from a nervous system trying to solve for safety with the tools it has. And both can leave you more isolated or more exposed than you intended. Somewhere between total withdrawal and total openness is a smaller, more deliberate practice. Noticing who has already, in small and unremarkable ways, shown you they're worth a second look. A few things worth paying attention to as you build this kind of discernment. Number one, consistency across contexts. Someone's behavior toward you in a one-on-one setting compared to a group setting, compared to a setting with their boss in the room. A person who treats you the same way, regardless of who's watching, is showing you something. A person whose warmth changes depending on the audience is also showing you something. Number two, how they handle other people's mistakes. You might notice how a colleague responds when someone else messes up in a meeting. Do they pile on? Stay silent while someone else is thrown under the bus? Or do they redirect, soften the moment, give the person room to recover? This tells you more about how they'd handle your mistakes than almost anything they'd say directly to you. Number three, response to small vulnerability. Before sharing anything with real weight, it can help to test the water with something low stakes. Mentioning you're having a rough week without detail. Admitting you don't know something in a meeting. Watching what comes back. Curiosity and normalization are different responses than subtle judgment or information that quietly resurfaces later in ways it shouldn't. Number 4, what they do with information when you're not there. This one takes longer to gather, and that's the point. Trust that's earned slowly tends to hold up better than trust that's given quickly. Number 5, whether their support requires anything from you in return. An ally who helps and lets it be helping is different from someone who helps and then brings it up later or expects loyalty as repayment. Watching for that difference protects you from relationships that look like allyship but function more like leverage. None of this needs to happen through direct conversation or confrontation. Most of it can be gathered simply by paying attention over weeks, not days. Here's a pattern that comes up often in coaching conversations. Someone realizes, sometimes years into a role, that they've been silently auditioning colleagues for trustworthiness the entire time, without ever naming it as a skill. It often gets labeled as being guarded or hard to get close to or slow to warm up. Reframed, it's closer to a form of professional risk assessment, developed out of necessity, that most workplaces never teach anyone to do on purpose. Once that skill gets named, a few things tend to shift. People stop feeling behind for not having a wide circle at work. They start noticing they've already identified 1 or 2 people. And then they start giving those relationships more deliberate attention instead of leaving them to chance. Building an ally has nothing to do with becoming universally well-liked in your workplace. It has nothing to do with forcing closeness with someone because they're the highest-ranking person in the room, or because everyone else seems to trust them. And it has nothing to do with disclosing your full story to prove you're ready to be close to someone. An ally can be someone you've never discussed anything personal with at all. The relationship can be built entirely on how someone behaves in professional situations, how they credit your work, how they back you up in a meeting, how they respond when you disagree with them. Safety in a workplace relationship is demonstrated far more reliably through behavior than through disclosure. You might notice some hesitation here, a worry about misreading someone, trusting the wrong person, getting burned again. That worry deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. Hypervigilance around trust in a workplace usually developed for a reason, and it doesn't need to be argued out of existence to be worked with. What often helps is building in a longer runway before trust gets extended. Watching for a few more weeks, testing with something smaller before something larger, letting the evidence build instead of deciding all at once. The goal isn't fearless trust, it's trust with enough evidence behind it to hold weight. Allies at work often reveal themselves in unremarkable moments rather than dramatic ones. The colleague who mentions your contribution in a meeting you weren't in. The one who checks in after noticing you seemed off, without turning it into a whole conversation you didn't consent to. The one who gives you a heads up before a change lands so you're not blindsided in front of a room. These moments are easy to miss if you're only watching for grand gestures of loyalty. Once you start watching for the small ones instead, they tend to become more visible and more common than expected. Building an ally in an unsafe culture rarely starts with a conversation. It usually starts with attention. Noticing who's already been showing up consistently in ways that were easy to overlook because they weren't loud about it. You don't need the whole room. You need 1 or 2 people whose behavior has already told you something true. If this is resonating, and you're finding yourself wanting support identifying your own patterns around trust and safety at work, I invite you to consider booking a free discovery call. You'll find the link in the show notes. We'd spend the time exploring what's coming up for you specifically and what next steps might make sense. I would be honored to be part of your journey. If this episode helped you see your own instincts around trust a little differently, subscribing means you'll have this kind of support waiting for you before your next hard moment at work, not after. And if there's someone in your life who's quietly doing this same kind of reading the room work right now, sending this episode their way might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Your Trauma Wise Career Guide. I'll see you next time. You're not walking this path alone. Every step you take toward a trauma-wise career is an act of courage, and I'm here cheering you on. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with another survivor who needs to hear this message. Together, we're rewriting the rules of career success. Keep rising, keep healing, keep building.